My best friend stole everything from me, but what he didn't know was that one day I'd take it all back, and more. The way this story ends still shocks me when I think about it, but to understand how we got there, I need to start at the very beginning. Back when loyalty meant everything to me, and betrayal was just a word I never thought would belong to my life. My name's Aaron. I'm 32 years old now, but this story starts way back when I was just a kid in small town Indiana. You know, the kind of place where everyone knows your name, where you grow up with the same neighbors your whole life. And that's where I met Brian. He was my best friend, my brother in everything but blood. We were inseparable. Summers spent racing our bikes through cornfields, winters huddled inside each other's houses playing video games till our eyes stung. I still remember the first time we got in trouble together. We were 9 years old, caught sneaking cookies from his mom's kitchen. Instead of ratting me out, Brian took the blame. From that day on, I swore I'd trust him with my life. That trust only grew as we got older. In high school, we shared everything. Secrets, plans, even heartbreaks. When I got my first crush, it was Brian who gave me advice. When he struck out at baseball, it was me cheering the loudest for him. We were more than friends. We were each other's anchor. And my parents loved him too. My dad used to say, "Aaron, if I ever had another son, I'd want him to be like Brian." You can imagine what that meant to me. He wasn't just in my life. He was stitched into the fabric of my family. But here's the thing about life. You never notice the cracks in the wall until it's too late. Looking back now, I realize there were signs. Small, almost invisible, but there. A shadow in his smile when I succeeded. A hesitation in his voice when I shared my dreams. At the time, I brushed it off as nothing. After all, he was my best friend. Why would I ever doubt him? Little did I know that blind trust would one day cost me everything. As we grew older, life started to get more complicated. After high school, I decided to study business. I had this dream of one day running my own store, something small but mine. Brian, on the other hand, wasn't really into school. He bounced around working odd jobs, never quite sticking to anything. Still, we stayed close. He'd crash on my couch when things got tough, raid my fridge like it was his own, and I never minded. He was family. But that's when the little things began to creep in. I remember the first time it happened. We were out at a local bar just celebrating my new internship. I was excited, telling him about the opportunities ahead, the kind of people I'd be learning from. And I caught it, the flicker in his eyes. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his face. "Must be nice," he muttered under his breath, just low enough that I almost missed it. At first I ignored it. Maybe he was just having a rough day, but then it happened again. Whenever I shared something good, he had this way of twisting it. A backhanded comment here, a sarcastic laugh there. One night, I even overheard him talking to someone else. He didn't know I was around the corner. "Yeah, Aaron's lucky, man." Everything just falls into his lap. Some people don't even have to try. Those words stung because I was trying every single day. But instead of confronting him, I let it slide. That's what loyalty does. It blinds you. Still, we carried on like nothing was wrong. After college, I finally managed to open my own small store. It wasn't much at first. An old building with peeling paint, squeaky floors, and shelves I had to put together by hand. But it was mine. And I was proud. Brian was right there at the grand opening, clapping the loudest, telling everyone he'd been with me since day one. He even gave a little speech, joking about how he taught me everything I knew. People laughed. I laughed too, but deep inside, something twisted. See, when you care about someone, you ignore the shadows. You focus on the light. And I kept telling myself, he's just joking, he's just proud. But those shadows were growing. I remember one particular night, late after closing. I was counting the day's earnings, the register drawer open, bills stacked neatly on the counter. Brian leaned against the wall, watching. "You're really raking it in, huh?" he said, smiling. I laughed, a little nervous. "Not really. It's just enough to keep the lights on, but the way his eyes lingered on that money, it made me uneasy, just for a second. And that's when the thought hit me, a thought I instantly pushed away. Could Brian ever take something from me? I shook my head, almost ashamed for even thinking it. He was my best friend, my brother. He'd never cross that line. At least, that's what I believed. But belief doesn't change reality, and reality was about to hit me harder than I could ever imagine. The night it happened is burned into my memory. It was a Thursday in late autumn, the kind of night where the air feels sharp and the streets are quiet except for the crunch of leaves underfoot. Business had been picking up, and I'd stayed late at the shop to organize inventory. By the time I locked the front door, it was past midnight. Brian had been hanging around more than usual that week. He'd helped me move boxes, joked about how he was basically my unpaid employee. I didn't think much of it. Having him there felt normal, comforting even. He was part of the furniture of my life, always present. That evening, he showed up just as I was finishing the register. I remember the smell of his cologne, cheap, overpowering, mixed with a hint of cigarette smoke. "Need help closing up?" he asked casually. I smiled. "Nah, I've got it." "Just give me a second." The drawer was heavier than usual. I had done well that week, better than most. I stacked the bills carefully, counting out loud. The sound of paper sliding together filled the silence. Brian leaned closer, eyes fixed on my hands. "You ever get nervous, keeping all that cash around?" he asked almost too casually. I shrugged. "Sometimes. But it's safe here." He chuckled, but it wasn't his usual laugh. It was shorter, sharper. We left together like always. I locked the door, pocketed the key, and we walked down the street. He split off toward his apartment, giving me a half-hearted wave. "See you tomorrow, brother." And that was the last time I saw him as my friend. The next morning, when I arrived at the shop, something felt wrong. The front lock wasn't broken, but the door was slightly ajar. My stomach tightened. I stepped inside. The shelves were untouched, the floor spotless, but the register, my register, was wide open, empty, completely stripped. At first I froze. My brain refused to accept it. I checked the safe in the back. Empty. I checked the drawers under the counter. Empty. Thousands of dollars. Weeks of work. Gone. And then I noticed the back door. It wasn't forced open. The lock was clean, no signs of struggle. Whoever had done this had keys. I felt a wave of nausea hit me as reality sank in. There were only two people with keys. Me and Brian. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to believe maybe someone else had found a way in, maybe I'd misplaced the money somehow, maybe anything. But then I saw it. A small detail. A crushed cigarette butt near the back door. The same cheap brand Brian always smoked. He'd dropped it there without even realizing. My legs gave out, and I sat on the floor staring at the empty register. My chest tightened, a pain I can't describe. Worse than losing the money, worse than losing the shop. It was the betrayal. The knife between my ribs wasn't made of steel, it was made of trust. I thought about every moment we'd shared, riding bikes as kids, sneaking beers in high school, him clapping for me at my grand opening. All of it. Poisoned now. I had trusted him with everything, and he had gutted me. I didn't cry right away, I was too numb. But later, when I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the ceiling, it all hit me at once. The grief, the rage, the humiliation. He hadn't just stolen my money, he'd stolen the version of myself that believed in him. And in that moment, one thought began to take root. Slow and dangerous. He thinks he's won. But this story isn't over. Not yet. For days after the robbery, I moved like a ghost through my own life. People noticed. Customers asked why I looked so pale. My landlord asked why the rent was late. And even the old lady at the diner asked if I'd been sick. I wasn't sick, though. I was hollow. The shop felt like a corpse. I'd unlock the door, sweep the floors, but every creak of the register drawer mocked me. The shelves stood full, but I couldn't restock. Suppliers wanted payment. Bills piled up on my kitchen table, electric, water, insurance. And every envelope felt like another stone on my chest. And then there was Brian. He didn't vanish. That was the cruelest part. He walked around town like nothing had happened, like he hadn't ripped the soul out of my life. I'd see him at the bar, laughing too loudly, buying drinks for everyone, the wad of bills in his hand flashing like a badge of victory. One night, I followed him from across the street. He was leaning against his car, cigarette glowing in the dark, bragging to a couple of guys I didn't recognize. His voice carried through the night air. Man, it was easy. He never saw it coming. Poor guy probably still thinks someone else did it. They laughed, clinking bottles, and I swear my vision blurred with rage. My fists clenched so tight I thought my nails might break the skin of my palms. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my apartment, the dim yellow light of the lamp casting long shadows across the room. I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out the old notebook my father had given me. He used to say, "If you've got a problem, write it down. Writing makes the truth clear." So I wrote. I wrote Brian's name at the top of the page. Underneath, I wrote every single thing he had stolen from me. Not just the money, the trust, the friendship, the sense of safety, the years of loyalty I had given him. Line by line, the page filled with his crimes. And then I turned the page, and I wrote a single word at the top. Revenge. The word stared back at me like a flame. I didn't know how yet, I didn't know when, but I knew this. I wasn't going to the police. I wasn't going to beg for justice. Brian had chosen this path, and I was going to be the one waiting at the end of it. Over the next week, I started observing him. Not as a friend, not as a victim, as a hunter. I learned his patterns, when he drank, when he drove, when he bragged. I watched the way he treated people now that he had money in his pocket. He wasn't careful, he wasn't smart, he was reckless. He had taken my trust and turned it into his armor, and he thought it made him invincible. But invincible men don't look over their shoulder. They don't notice when someone's watching. And that, I realized, was his weakness. Every night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, planning in silence. My anger wasn't wild anymore. It was sharpening, condensing into something focused, something dangerous. I wasn't just a man who had been betrayed. I was becoming something else, a man with nothing to lose. And that's the kind of man who's willing to do anything. Once I made the decision, something inside me shifted. I stopped walking through life like a broken man. I started moving with intent. Every smile I gave in public was fake, but it kept people from asking too many questions. They thought I was getting better. Truth was, I was studying every corner of Brian's world, quietly tightening the noose he didn't even know was there. I started small. The first step was information. I knew Brian had no discipline with money. He always treated cash like it burned a hole in his pocket. So I started shadowing him. Not every night, not enough to be noticed, but often enough to see the pattern. Friday nights, he'd hit O'Malley's bar around 9 p.m., already a little drunk from whatever he'd been drinking at home. Saturday mornings, he'd sleep till noon, then hit the gas station to buy cigarettes and scratch-offs. On Mondays, he'd show up at the pool hall with his same cocky grin, flashing money and talking like he was some kind of king. The second step was leverage. I had an old buddy named Carl who still worked at the auto shop with my dad's old friends. Carl had a way of hearing things. I asked him, real casual-like, if he'd heard anything about Brian lately. He smirked and said, "Yes, your boy's been talking big about some investment deal he's got going. Sounds like a scam if you ask me. He's bragging about doubling his money in a month." That told me everything I needed. Brian wasn't just careless. He was greedy. Greed makes a man stupid. So I decided to feed that greed. I dusted off an old contact I hadn't spoken to in years. A guy named Jimmy who used to dabble in shady card games and get-rich-quick schemes. He owed me a favor, and when I explained what I wanted, he grinned like a wolf. The plan was simple. We'd let Brian think he was sitting on the inside of a gold mine. A fake business deal, the kind of thing that smelled like easy money. But here's the thing about Brian. He trusted me. Even after stabbing me in the back, he still believed deep down that I'd never see him for who he truly was. That was my edge. One night, I showed up at the bar. He wasn't expecting me. The look on his face when I walked through the door, priceless. His grin faltered just for a second before he plastered it back on. "Well, look who crawled out of his hole," he said, lifting his glass. "Didn't think you had the guts to face me." I sat down across from him, calm as stone. Inside, my blood was boiling, but I kept my voice steady. "You know, Brian," I said, "I heard about that investment deal you've been bragging about. Sounds like you're finally making moves." His eyes lit up. He leaned in, lowering his voice like he was letting me in on a secret. "Yeah, man. Big money. Real opportunity. Not for everyone, though. Gotta know the right people." I let him talk, nodding, acting impressed. And then when the timing was right, I played my card. "I might have something better," I whispered. "Something bigger. But it's not for just anyone. Takes guts." That was all it took. He bit down hard, hook, line, and sinker. By the end of the night, Brian thought he was about to step into a deal that would triple his money. He thought I was dumb enough to let him in on it. And as I walked out of that bar, his drunken laughter echoing behind me, I knew he had no idea he'd just stepped into the first stage of his downfall. Because this wasn't about money, this was about revenge, and I was only getting started. The days after that bar meeting felt like electricity running through my veins. For the first time since Brian stole my life, I wasn't the one stumbling in the dark. I was the one holding the flashlight. Every move I made was deliberate. Every word I spoke was calculated. And Brian? He was walking right where I wanted him, smiling the whole way. I didn't call him right away. That was important. If you hand a greedy man the prize too fast, he gets suspicious. No, I let him stew in it. Let him wonder what I meant by something bigger. 3 days went by before I sent a text. Short, almost careless. Got something we should talk about. Might be worth your time. Not 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed with his reply. When and where? That's how I knew he was already hooked. We met at a small diner off Route 23, the kind of place where the waitresses call you Han, and the coffee tastes like burnt rubber. Perfect spot. Public enough to keep things casual. Quiet enough for whispers. Brian slid into the booth across from me, hair slicked back, cheap leather jacket on his shoulders, acting like he was some big shot. So, he said, leaning forward, what's this opportunity you got? Don't leave me hanging. I sipped my coffee, let the silence drag just long enough to make him sweat. Then I laid it out, half-truths wrapped in shiny lies. I told him about a supposed land deal downstate, investors looking for partners, money doubling in weeks. I made it sound risky, but not too risky. I even dropped Jimmy's name, saying he had inside connections that made it all possible. Brian's eyes sparkled. He was nodding before I even finished. How much we talking? He asked. Depends on how serious you are, I said. Could start small, 10, 15 grand. Or, if you've really got the guts, more. He sat back, pretending to think it over, but I could see it in his face. He was already calculating how much he could throw in. He couldn't resist. The waitress came by, refilled our mugs, called him sweetheart. He barely noticed. His mind was already drowning in dollar signs. I'll do it, he finally said, smirking. Hell, I'll do more than that. I'll put in 20. I trust you. Those words almost made me laugh out loud. I trust you. The same man who gutted me without blinking was now handing me the knife and saying, go ahead. But I didn't laugh. I just nodded, serious as ever. All right, I said, but you keep this quiet. It's not the kind of deal you go bragging about. Of course, he said, leaning back with that smug grin. Don't worry. I know how to play the game. I paid the check and walked out into the night, the cool air hitting my face like a slap. My hands were steady, my steps sure. I wasn't the broken man he thought I was anymore. I was the storm he never saw coming. And the funniest part? Brian thought he was finally ahead. Thought he'd beaten me twice. He didn't realize he was already standing on the trapdoor, waiting for me to pull the lever. Revenge is a slow burn, and mine was only just starting to smoke. The night Brian handed me the money is burned into my memory like a scar. It was a Tuesday, cold and wet, the kind of night when the streets shine under streetlights like black glass. We agreed to meet at my place. Not the smartest move if this had been real business, but that was the point. I wanted him to feel comfortable, wanted him to think we were back to the good old days, two buddies chasing dreams together. He showed up right on time, knocking twice before pushing the door open like he owned the place. Same old Brian. He didn't ask permission. He just walked in with a grin and a duffel bag in his hand. Got it all here, he said, dropping the bag onto my coffee table with a thud. I stared at it, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might rattle my ribs. $20,000. I'd never seen that much cash in one place before. The bills smelled like ink and sweat, and the sight of them almost knocked the breath out of me, but I kept my face steady, calm. Good, I said. This will get us in the door. Jimmy's already warming up the investors. By next month, you'll be seeing returns. Brian chuckled, poured himself a drink from my counter without asking, and flopped onto the couch. I knew I could count on you. You're not like those other guys out there. You've always had vision. That's why we work. Vision. The word tasted bitter. He had no idea that the only vision I had was of him choking on his own arrogance when he realized what I'd done. We talked details, or rather, I fed him details, made up timelines, made up names, made up places. I drew him maps on scrap paper, showed him fake printouts of properties, even forged a few emails on my laptop. He didn't question a thing. That's the thing about greed. It blinds you worse than love ever could. After an hour, he leaned back, swirling his glass. Man, I gotta say, I wasn't sure about you for a while. You seemed different, but I guess you're still the same old you. Loyal. That word, loyal, it cut deep. He was testing me, I could feel it, but he didn't see the storm boiling under the surface. I've always been loyal, I said quietly, almost whispering. And I meant it. Just not to him. He stayed another half hour, bragging about how he was already thinking of what he'd buy once the money doubled. A new truck, maybe even a boat. He laughed loud, the kind of laugh that fills a room and leaves no space for anyone else. When he finally left, I locked the door behind him and stood in the silence, staring at that bag of money. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the moment. This wasn't about the cash. Not really. This was about balance, about tipping the scales he had slammed down on me years ago. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up, planning my next move, rehearsing every word I'd say, every expression I'd wear. If this was going to work, I couldn't just take his money, I had to make him feel the sting. Revenge isn't about breaking bones or spilling blood. It's about breaking trust, the one thing you can never glue back together. And Brian? He'd wake up one morning thinking he was rich, only to realize he'd handed his fortune to the very man he once betrayed. By the time he figured it out, it would be far too late. And for the first time in years, I felt alive. By now, my anger had cooled into something sharper, something calculated. Rage burns fast, but betrayal lingers like a slow poison, creeping into every thought, every dream, every waking moment. And I decided if Ryan had taught me one thing, it was how to play the long game. I started small. No loud accusations, no direct confrontations. I still saw him around, flashing that smug grin, spending money like water, showing off things I knew weren't his. People started asking questions. Where had he suddenly gotten so much? But Ryan was always quick with a smooth story, and I stayed quiet, nodding along, pretending like I believed him. That was the first part of my plan. Patience. At night, I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything we'd been through. His laugh echoing in my head. That time we skipped class to sit under the bridge and dream about the future. How we used to talk about making something of ourselves. All that history, gone in one night because greed got the better of him. That thought hardened something inside me. I wasn't going to just move on. He had taken too much from me, my trust, my peace, and my future. I would take it back. So I began watching him, not obsessively, not enough to draw suspicion, but carefully. Where he went, who he hung out with, what new lies he spun to keep up appearances. Ryan wasn't as smart as he thought. He was reckless, sloppy. He craved validation, and that made him careless. Every time he bragged, every time he boasted about his hard work and smart investments, I took note. It was all fuel for later. Then I made myself scarce. I stopped showing up in the usual places. If he thought I was broken, licking my wounds, all the better. Let him believe he'd won. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding. I picked up side work, odd jobs, anything I could find. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me something Ryan didn't have anymore. Discipline. While he was burning through stolen money, I was laying the groundwork for something solid. Months went by. People's whispers grew louder. His stories stopped lining up. He owed favors he couldn't pay back. And slowly, his perfect little empire of lies began to crack. I didn't lift a finger, yet I just waited, watching as the walls started closing in on him. And then, when the time was right, I set my plan in motion. I found a way to expose him, but not in the way you'd think. See, revenge isn't about screaming in someone's face or throwing punches. Real revenge is subtle. It's watching the very thing they crave most turn into their undoing. Ryan's weakness was pride. So I let his pride destroy him. All it took was planting a few seeds, whispering the right words to the right people, letting his own lies tangle together until even he couldn't keep track. And when the truth finally exploded, it wasn't me standing in front of him with accusations. It was everyone else. I'll never forget the look on his face that day. The same arrogance he always wore had drained out, replaced with panic. People he thought respected him now turned away. Friends abandoned him. His so-called success crumbled right in front of him. And all I did was stand there, silent, watching him drown in the same betrayal he once dealt me. But the story doesn't end there. No, this is just where it begins to twist in ways even Ryan could never imagine. Because what happened next shocked even me. Ryan's perfect little kingdom began to collapse in slow motion, and I had a front row seat. At first it was whispers. People in town started talking about missing money, about lies that didn't add up, about jobs Ryan promised but never delivered. The thing about a small town? Secrets don't stay buried long, and once the first crack appears, the whole wall starts crumbling. I'll never forget the day I walked into the diner and heard two old men at the counter whispering, "You hear about Ryan? Caught short on his books again." Their voices weren't loud, but the whole place seemed to lean in. The waitress, Mrs. McCall, who had always adored Ryan, just shook her head and muttered, "Karma's got a long memory." The man who once walked in like a king now looked hunted. His hair was a mess, his shirt wrinkled, and those sharp, confident eyes darted around like he expected someone to throw a punch at him any second. I could have stepped in, I could have defended him, told people to ease up, given him a chance. But why should I? This was the same man who had smiled in my face while stabbing me in the back, who had gutted me financially and emotionally and left me to drown. No, this was justice catching up, slow and merciless. Ryan tried to hold on. He tightened his grip on everything, his business, his friendships, even his girlfriend. But the tighter he held, the more slipped through his fingers. Investors pulled out. Customers stopped coming. His so-called girlfriend? She vanished overnight with another guy who actually had money in the bank. One night, I saw him sitting outside that very diner where everyone once sang his praises. He sat alone, his shoulders hunched, staring at the ground like he was waiting for it to open up and swallow him. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pity. What I felt was silence. Like the storm that had raged inside me for so long had finally burned itself out. But then, just when I thought his downfall was complete, he made a move I never expected. A desperate, ugly move. He came back for me. Late one night, I woke to the sound of gravel crunching outside my place. When I peered out the window, I saw a figure standing there in the dark, shoulders hunched, fists clenched. Even in the shadows, I knew it was him. Ryan. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. His revenge wasn't over, but mine hadn't even begun. The knock on my door was sharp, almost frantic. For a second, I considered ignoring it, but my gut told me this wasn't going away. I opened the door, and there he was, Ryan. His face was pale, eyes bloodshot, shirt untucked like he hadn't slept in days. He looked nothing like the man who once strutted around this town with his chest puffed out and pockets full of my money. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice trembling. Every instinct screamed at me to slam the door, but I didn't. Not because I wanted to hear him, but because part of me wanted to see just how far he had fallen. So I stepped aside. Inside, he didn't sit down. He just stood there in my living room, pacing, hands shaking. Finally, he blurted it out. "I need money." I almost laughed in his face. Money. After everything he took from me, after everything he destroyed, he came back here. Like I was some ATM he could just tap again. "Why would I give you a single cent?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. He swallowed hard, eyes darting around. "Because if you don't, I'll have nothing left. They're coming after me, man. The people I borrowed from, they don't play around. I need a way out." And there it was. The real Ryan. Not the friend I grew up with, not the golden boy everyone admired. Just a coward who had burned every bridge and now stood at the edge of the fire, begging for someone to save him. "You stole everything from me," I said slowly, letting each word cut through the silence. "My trust, my savings, my future. And now you expect me to bail you out?" His lips quivered, and for a second I thought he might break down, but then he looked me dead in the eye and his voice hardened. "If you don't help me, I'll make sure you regret it." You think you've won, but I still know things about you, things that could ruin you. That's when I realized this wasn't just a desperate man. This was a drowning man willing to drag me down with him. But what he didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment. I had been planning for months, quietly setting the stage. And if he wanted to play dirty, I was ready to show him just how dirty I could get. Because this wasn't going to end with me giving him money. It was going to end with Ryan losing everything. Forever. I knew I had one real chance to end this cleanly. No fists, no fires, no messy scenes. Just a truth that would land so hard it couldn't be patted away. For months, I'd been collecting pieces. His bragging texts, the night he bragged at O'Malley's about cash from a clean deal, the fake invoices I'd slipped into his inbox, the photos of him flashing bills. But words and pictures alone don't always do the job. People make excuses for people they like, so I built a moment where he'd speak the thing he couldn't take back. Jimmy and I set it up like a con artist scripts a play. He told Ryan there was a private investor, reputable, quiet, wealthy, willing to wire a seed amount to prove trust. The catch was simple. The investor wanted a recorded promise, a verbal confirmation that Ryan would handle funds the right way. For a greedy man who loved to hear himself talk, that was bait he couldn't refuse. We booked the meeting at the old Vance warehouse, the kind of place with chain-link windows and the smell of machine oil that keeps people honest. I turned up an hour early, watched the light change, felt the same electric hush I'd felt the night I first decided to stop being a victim. The warehouse smelled of dust and old rope. Between the beams, I could see the city lights blink like distant teeth. Ryan arrived late, coat soaked from drizzle, eyes darting. His confidence tried to hold until he stepped inside. Jimmy introduced the investor, a quiet man with steady hands, and Ryan started in. The numbers, the properties, the timeline. He leaned forward, palm open on the crate like he owned it. Then, drunk on his own lies, he started to confess the things that mattered most before the camera. He boasted about the shop, how easy it had been to take the register one night, how he'd hidden the cash, how he'd cashed out small amounts into a chain of quick wins. He mimicked me, mocked my small dreams. He laughed like a man with nothing left to lose. What he didn't know was that the investor's phone was rolling, and so was mine. The whole conversation was recorded. It was easy, and he never suspected, landed like another brick on the story I'd been building. When he threatened, when he finally spat the words about hurting me if I didn't cooperate, I let it ring out into the open. It was the admission I needed. Motive, method, malice. Then Jimmy gave the nod. 2 plainclothes officers stepped from the dark and switched on the warehouse lights. Ryan's eyes went wide, then narrow, then utterly broken as they read him his rights. He tried to make the room spin the truth. Blame the investor, blame me, call it a setup. But the recording played back like a judge with a gavel. He had confessed. He had admitted to theft, to threats, to a chain of offenses that stacked easily into a case the police couldn't ignore. They cuffed him. The weight of the cold metal on his wrists looked small against the enormity of what he'd done, but it was enough. As they walked him out, he turned and searched my face, rabid, pleading, furious. And for a split second I saw the boy who once took the blame for cookies. Then the moment passed. He was led to a car with its lights flashing, and the town that once cheered him watched in silence as he disappeared. People asked me later if I felt triumphant. The truth is stranger. I felt hollow. Watching him go, I realized what had been taken from both of us. Him, his choices, me, any naive idea that righting wrongs would be clean or restoring what was lost. The shop was still mine in the papers, but paper won't stitch back a friendship. Jail time won't undo the nights I lay awake counting bills in my empty drawer. In the weeks that followed, some people thanked me. Quiet nods, oil-stained hands, clapping me on the back. Others glared like I'd been the one to hand them the knife. The court case unfolded the way court cases do. Testimony, evidence, plaintiff, excuses. Ryan pled guilty to theft and a handful of lesser charges. He got a sentence that matched the paperwork stacked against him. The town breathed a cautious relief, like a wound that finally scabbed over. But relief was not the same as peace. Sometimes, late at night, I go by the shop and stand in the doorway, watching the empty parking space where he used to park. I think about the small things. His ridiculous laugh when he burned the fries, the time he taught my nephew to throw a baseball. I think about how easy it is to become someone you barely recognize when temptation wears the right suit. People ask if I regret it, if I wish I'd handled it differently. I do and I don't. If you ask for a single answer, I'll give you this. He hurt me in a way you don't fix with apologies or with money. I took back what was stolen, but in doing so I traded a life of quiet for something louder, colder, and more complicated. When the dust settled, the shop reopened. I repaired what I could, painted over the chips, replaced the register with a new one that clicked clean every time. The neighborhood came back slowly. Customers, neighbors, quiet people who liked the way a small business smelled like fresh bread and old wood. But no matter how many mornings I unlocked the door, the echo of that friendship, what it had been and what it became, followed me like a second shadow. So yeah, he never saw my revenge coming. And when it landed true. But there's a cost to truth, and sometimes justice is the heaviest thing you can carry. When the verdict came down, I thought it would feel like thunder. I thought I'd walk out of that courtroom taller, free, lighter than I'd ever been. But the truth? It was quiet. Too quiet. The judge's gavel echoed, Ryan's sentence was read, and just like that, it was over. Years of friendship, laughter, secrets, trust, all reduced to a case file number and a man in handcuffs. I sat there long after everyone left, staring at the empty chairs. That's when it hit me. Revenge doesn't give you back what you lost. It doesn't erase betrayal. It doesn't stitch close the hole someone tears in your chest. What it does is remind you that choices have weight, and once they're made, you can't take them back. Ryan wrote me a letter from prison a few months later. I didn't open it, not because I hated him, but because I already knew what it would say. Apologies, excuses, maybe even a memory or two to soften the edges. But some words, once broken, can't be pieced back together. I still run my shop. The register rings again, the shelves are stocked, and neighbors come by with nods and smiles. From the outside, life looks normal, but every time I count the drawer at night, I remember the friend who turned it into a battlefield. And maybe that's the lesson I'll leave you with. Trust is the rarest currency. Once it's stolen, you'll never hold it the same way again. So yes, my best friend stole everything from me, and yes, he never saw my revenge coming. But in the end, I realized something even more shocking. Revenge isn't victory. It's just survival with scars you carry forever.